Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Tuesday night. And actually, I understand it is International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day to all our viewers. I am excited tonight. I have a beautiful young lady with me, Dr. Elka M. Stevens. She is an associate professor and coordinator of the new fashion design program and the fashion and merchandising programs, which I believe ended in 2015 in the Department of Art at Howard University. She currently teaches a variety of courses, including Introduction to the Fashion Industry, African American Dress, Textiles, Experimental Studio, International Trade, and Entrepreneurship. In addition to teaching almost 20 years in both the United States, Ghana, and West Africa, and actually right now she is a critical race studies artist in residence at Michigan State University. She's taught, as I mentioned, in Ghana and West Africa. She also teaches micro enterprise trainer. I'm saying this wrong. A micro enterprise trainer for the Peace Corps in Ghana, which is incredible. Oh my goodness, this woman is phenomenal. She uses textiles and clothing as a lens for analysis, and that's some of what we're going to talk about tonight. So, without further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Elka Stevens and Miss Stevens. Please forgive me for stumbling over all of your incredible accomplishments. You know what? If I could just sit in your head for one moment, I don't know if I can handle it. Incredible. Ghana, West Africa, Accra. What was that like?
It was a wonderful experience to be able to live in Ghana for a year and to be able to work with the Peace Corps as well as the government of Ghana, as well as one of the universities that was there. Just an awesome experience, and I look forward to being able to return to Ghana to continue to conduct research and, of course, buy more fabric.
Oh my goodness, that means you have the real stuff. Oh my gosh. Do you take that in the class with you when you're
I do.
teaching?
I do.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
always great to be able to show authentic goods
Mhm.
and things that I've collected along my journeys for my students.
That makes it real. That makes
It
it real.
does. It does.
Well, I am excited about having you with us tonight. Everybody, we are going to talk to Dr. Stevens. We're going to talk about critical race studies. We're going to talk about the perspective that she's instructing and sharing it with students. Then we'll talk about fashion, the fashion programs at Howard University and Black Fashion Career Day. And also, I have an announcement for everybody who waits until the end. I will tell you about the person who just confirmed to be a part of Black Fashion Career Day. So you want to stay tuned. So without further ado, let's dive in. This is a serious subject. So I can't say that I'm that knowledgeable about it. So I'm really glad to have you to be able to educate us tonight, bring some enlightenment. Tell us critical race studies theory. What is it?
All right. First of all, Carla, let me say thank you so very much for inviting me to be with you this evening. So, to answer your question, critical race theory. This is basically a theoretical and interpretive model that examines the appearance of race as well as racism across dominant modes of production as well as expression.
Mm,
It is on the surface seems to be very complicated because of the language that is often used and in which the discussions are situated, but it's based upon five tenets or foundational concepts here.
okay.
And the first is that racism is ordinary and it's something that is accepted and just occurs, and it's a natural byproduct of just life.
Mm,
Um, there's also this idea around interest convergence. Also, foundationally, it is based upon the social construction of race. We all understand that racial categories are made up. They don't exist in reality. Um, in terms of what we recognize, but culturally and socially, these are dominant things in our lives. The idea of storytelling and counter storytelling. So we have notions around narrative and who's controlling the history and who's controlling the perspectives to which we're being exposed. and also the notion that whites have actually been recipients of civil rights legislation.
Hmm.
It seeks also to understand the manner in which victims of systematic and or institutional racism are affected by perceptions of race, and how these individuals create and negotiate their identity or identities within our society. Furthermore, CRT examines the social construction of race in conjunction with things such as class and gender, nationhood, sexual orientation, and these other things that we identify as part of our identities. But
Hmm.
at its base, CRT is about inclusion, and it's about locating or creating opportunities to share experiences and to be recognized or included in a larger narrative. It's very common that marginalized groups or people of color in particular have been systematically um, represented in a particular ways, often which are negative or cast a negative perspective
Hmm.
on the individuals as well as their contributions and even their existence. But that's even if people of color are included in the narrative at all. And we oftentimes see lots of opportunities where there are gaps in the narrative, where they're just people are just not included in the stories that we hear. They're not a part of the cultural text. And we have years of evidence, if not centuries, of evidence of these institutionalized inequalities of racialized groups, and what their experiences are every day.
That's a lot.
It
And,
is.
and we've experienced a lot. So, I mean, what for how did it originate?
Well,
I mean,
it's not new. And this is one of the fascinating things I think that some people miss is that, we've been having discussions um, in scholarly communities and particularly in legal studies around this notion of critical race studies or critical race theories. And oftentimes, when you look at the literature, it has an origin point somewhere in the 70s and late 70s, early 80s, even
mhm,
though some people talk about it started before that because it was after the civil rights movement, where people, particularly people of color, were realizing that they had not or questioning the amount of progress that they had achieved during that time. And
mm,
so eventually, like I said, starting officially about the 70s and 80s, you had scholars such as Derek Bell, Alan Freeman, Richard Delgado. A little bit later, in the late 80s, early 90s, you had Kimberly Crenshaw, Mari Matsuda, as well as Patricia Williams, who've continued to challenge these ideas around positionality, inclusion, and having participated in these global discourses and participation within the global discourses. And it's interesting when you think about CRT or when people start talking about critical race theory, we hear terms such as white privilege, where
mhm,
we're thinking about various social and political advantages where that people have been able to secure or achieve based upon their racial membership. Microaggressions. There's been lots of conversation around microaggressions as well, where you're thinking about some minute instances of prejudice that,
mhm,
in some, can contribute to trauma, among other results. Institutionalized racism is part of the discussion as well. When we think about systematic ways that a dominant society will begin to restrict a racialized group or that group's access,
mhm.
um, social construction. And again, we talk about social construction when we talk about this idea about race to begin with. But race is actually just the product of social thought and relationships and ideas and how power relates to that.
I
You know,
think you said the key word, the power.
exactly, power. You have to talk about power when you have these discussions. And also ideas around intersectionality. And the intersectionality suggests that race alone does not define who we are. We navigate through a variety of identities, and it's the combination of all of these different identities with race that begin to define who we are, to what things we have access in our experiences as well.
Hmm. Keep going, Carla. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. What does it mean? How is it impacting you as an educator, and why is it important that critical race studies or theories be taught?
You know, it's something that I think we've all experienced as people of color, and particularly as women of color. We've experienced this all of our lives, and we realize that we have to have some type of tool or framework that
Mm.
we can use, to begin to examine the narratives, find the gaps in the narratives, correct the narratives, and create opportunity for people who look like us, sound like us, are near where we are, far away, in order for us to create more forms as well as more equitable forms of power. So
Mm.
it's critical that we have this tool in our repertoire. Now, there are lots of tools that we can use. And this one is very comprehensive, again, looking on both a macro and micro level. But I think about CRT as being, do I want to use a teaspoon to dig a hole, or do I want to use a shovel?
Ooh.
And CRT becomes the shovel.
Ooh.
It's so, I mean, you have to think about, um, how we want to frame our observations and our everyday experiences, as well as being able to find solutions. And that becomes a very powerful tool. Some might even suggest it's dynamite. Um,
Mm.
so we have to continue to find ways to achieve our goals, our desired outcomes, to address this pandemic of race.
What?
That becomes the first way. I think
Mhm.
that's why it's important. I think it's also important that we have these discussions around CRT very broadly, because one of our most visible and tangible indicators of cultural expression, is how we present ourselves on a daily basis, primarily through how we look, our fashion, how we're putting ourselves together. So that
Mhm.
becomes important for, people of color, if not everyone, but particularly
Mhm.
for people of color, because so much inspiration and influence are drawn from communities of color. And yet, so many members of these communities, as a whole, are being victimized, marginalized, or discriminated against, while simply just being a person of color or being Black. Oftentimes, also, you have contributions of these individuals who are being ignored and left out of the narrative. I mean, totally no attribution whatsoever. And so it's very important that we do have opportunities to include people and to adjust the narrative so that they are representative of a broad range of lived experiences.
Mhm.
On a personal level, for number three, or the third thing, happens to be, discussions around CRT are very important so that we can decolonize the curriculum at educational institutions. And
Mhm.
as a lifelong educator, it's very important that we're teaching students how to dismantle sites of oppression, how to be able to open their eyes and have them to dream bigger and broader
Mhm.
than people before them.
Mhm.
I know I often grew up hearing, this is the dream of the slave. And I'm saying, well, we need some different dreams, and we need to dream
Uh,
bigger. We need to dream broader. And in this technological environment, it's so important that we're exposing our students to as much as possible. And even in my residency, which is really wonderful here at Michigan State, I find myself in positions where I'm teaching students who may have never had a major, a Black professor in their major, or they may have never had a Black professor at all. And of course, as an HBCU graduate, Howard University, like you're from South Carolina State. I can't imagine teaching at Howard. I can't imagine never having had a Black
Mhm.
professor. And the wonderful thing about Howard is I had professors from all cultures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Professors were white. There were professors from India. There were professors from Ghana.
Mm,
There were professors from China. I mean, I had a
nice.
wide range of people, which was fabulous. But
You know, not to interrupt you on that, but I'm listening to what you just said. Now I went, no disrespect, I went to a HBCU too. Everybody knows Howard University is one of the top ranking universities. And as I listen to you talk about China, the list of the different areas, the diverse
mhm,
educators that you have, I didn't have that same. I had, okay, let's talk. I had people who weren't chocolate. I had people who were vanilla who came to South Carolina State University, but I can't say I don't remember. I'm not saying they weren't there in my department. Let me say that. Let me put that out there, which was business. I don't remember having that much of a variety.
mhm.
And so listening to you talk about the variety that you had and thinking about the fact that Howard is one of the top ranked, I'm envious, okay? But Howard is one of the top ranked schools. This is telling us why, and this is empowering that factor of diversity. Am I thinking right?
Oh, I mean, definitely. It is, the more that we can connect with other individuals and learn their experiences and even learn their language, if that language is not English.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we learn more about each other, being able to understand the cultural expressions and the visuality of particular groups is essential. And I think that's one of the strong points that we do have at Howard University because we do track a cadre of professionals from around the world. And with that, I know I wouldn't trade my HBCU experience for anything. And even when I think about my colleagues, I have colleagues from around the globe as well at Howard, and it's so exciting. But when I think about being here or in my
Mm-hmm.
experiences here and talking with students, both Black and white, who may have never had a person of color in the classroom, that causes me pause and it makes me say, oh yeah, we need to have this CRT discussion happening more frequently. And I have to take a moment to acknowledge one of the coordinators for the residency program here, who thought this was something that was necessary in there. This is year 5. I'm part of the 5th cohort for the
Mm-hmm.
group. And so it's exciting to know that there are people around the country who are engaging in these discussions, who are identifying the gaps and making sure that diverse stories are heard, where we have a variety of people from whom we can learn, and we're not just caught in these traditional modes of learning. That
Mm-hmm.
is essential. So I definitely need and want these discussions around CRT and people to recognize the importance of diversity and inclusion as just something that is not something that happens as rarely as it probably does, but becomes something that becomes routinized.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't have to think, oh well, how do we include somebody Black? We should already have somebody Black. Or how do
Mm-hmm.
we include some from another culture? Or looking around the table, you say, oh, we can't do anything else until we have representation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is something that to which we must subscribe as and aspire, but also making sure even those of us, of course, who are at HBCUs, or who have had HBCU experience, understand that yes, there's diversity that is global to which students must be shown or exposed, but also there's diversity within the Black diaspora as well, because Black in one place may not be Black in another. And these experiences are different no matter where you go, even though we may have similar skin colors, or we may look the same and have some common ancestry, etc.
You know, we are the Rainbow Coalition. You know, in more ways than one. Oh my, that just remind see, I'm about to get off topic, but I'll say it real quick, and Lord, if she hears me, I'm not being disrespectful, but this goes with Career Day. Like they HBO now has the oh, what is it called? It's about the fashion. It's the documentary about the fashion fair. Beauty is
Yes.
Blackness, and I'm saying the title so incorrectly, but now I have to subscribe to HBO this weekend so I can watch it.
I think it's
But
free though. I think it's free this weekend.
oh, see, look at
I
that.
think I
Look
think
at that.
it starts
Look at that.
today.
Look at that. I got to watch it this weekend. I have to watch it. But I saw a post, I believe, that Rachel Dolezal is in it. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but the reason that came to my mind is because we are the Rainbow Coalition. You can't, and then there's the movie, if anybody's seen it on Netflix, Passing,
Mhm.
where they have, the young lady who's, she's not dark skinned like myself, and she looks like she's vanilla, and she's passing as white, and they don't know. Her friend is passing as white. That's what it was. Her friend is passing as white. She could have almost passed as white. And if anybody hasn't seen it, I encourage you to watch Netflix about the passing. And as I say that, I had a great aunt who could have passed as white. This is her skin tone. So just going with what you were saying about, the different aspects of it. But then I want to go back to something too, because you mentioned the attire, the fashion.
Mhm.
Talk about that a little bit more, about that critical race studies. And I grew up with my grandmother always instilling in me, um, people are going to treat you how they see you.
Right.
And so now I'll let you talk. Yes.
My pleasure. It's, one of the things we make so many assumptions about who we are and who people are based upon how we look. It's about skin color as far as race, and then of course, looking at ideas around colorism, which exists in a variety of different communities. It's not something that is just unique to Black people. It has a very strong history within Asian cultures as well. And looking at ways that we begin to identify ourselves and even identify what is white. Because if you look across the history of America and you look at how people came to America, particularly from parts of Europe, I mean, white is a spectrum as well.
Mm.
And it's not as probably recognizably visible to as many people, because then you get into skin undertones and facial features, not to mention a variety of hair textures. But yet, all of these different groups who may have had some lesser visible differences have been grouped together in this broader category because we've expanded our ideas about what it means to be white.
Mm.
So we're not just thinking about just a singular group of people as beyond what we imagine as this division between Black and white, because many of us, that's how we're shaping our world. It's either Black or it's white or other. And if you want to think about diversity, start looking at the categories that they're asking for on the census data. We move from quite a few to a new set. And with that, that's about discussions around inclusion and identity. And then then you include in that ideas around race. So you have lots of things to take into account as we're beginning to think about the manner in which we present ourselves. And everyone, and I do say everyone, I mean, everyone has something unique. And oftentimes we all look different, which is,
Mhm.
you know, which is all and another conversation that we could take off and talk about for a while, but we're not going to do that. I
Oh
too
my
stay on task.
Mm. Well, when you talk about that, I think that's the perfect segue to talk about the laws. Some of
Okay.
the laws that they're using, and tell us how they're using them against us or trying.
It's, with the laws, I read somewhere that there are like 1,300 laws that they're trying to enact around critical race studies. I mean, critical race studies or critical race theory. And trying to get into the specifics of each of the laws, I just think is a lot. Um, but what I find most interesting about critical race studies, Carla, is this: they're tacking anti critical race studies bills or parameters on everything. It is, oh, you want to get funding for this? Well, you can't teach critical race studies. And I think it was in Florida, maybe I saw the governor
Hmm.
had one of the governor had attached an anti CRT bill, and I think in Virginia as well. I recall reading something about that, and it's interesting because I wonder whether or not the constituencies even know what critical race studies is. That's the first thing. But critical race studies and the sheer mention of critical race studies does one thing and one thing very well in majority groups or so-called majority groups. It creates fear. It
Hmm.
is an opportunity where people are using critical race studies or the thought of critical race studies without knowing what it means and knowing what it entails, but to suggest a zero-sum game where you have winners and losers. And so what you have is some of these political leaders are suggesting that if critical race studies is taught, that they're going to be that people are going to have a perceived, and I do mean perceived, they have a perceived lack of representation or resources or loss of power or even erasure, which is really interesting because I'm playing, wait a minute, those are things that have characterized communities of colors for years.
Red
Wait,
lines.
exactly. And so, and the other thing is that a lot of people seem to believe that or feel, I mean, not say necessarily believe, but they feel that whites are being oppressed and considered to be oppressors while CRT is classifying all Black people as hopelessly oppressed victims. And that's not what's happening. That's not the purpose of CRT. That's not what happens when you put CRT into use as a daily practice or this tool. But there are some tangible consequences of institutionalized racism, one of which you mentioned was redlining, because we know that racism is interwoven into U.S. institutions such as the criminal justice system. It's in
Hmm.
the educational system. It's in the labor market. It's in the housing market. It's in the healthcare system. And we could continue. We could continue to have these discussions and just continue with the list. But the laws and the rules and the regulations and the procedures upon which these institutions are imagined and built, how these institutions govern themselves, and how they document and share their narratives always lead to differential outcomes on the basis of race. And that's where the challenge happens.
Hmm. What is, as a society, um, what is our responsibility? You
Oh
know,
my God.
how can we, this question, I have so many, I have the question, but I have it in different. What is, we as a people, what is our responsibility to make sure we're educated on these things so we vote right?
Right?
Um, and then how can we approach making sure this information is conveyed in the in the education system as well as to our youth, the generations that come after us?
Great question. And clearly, we're not going to have all the answers tonight, but I do have a few ideas about this, just a few.
Good.
Um, I'll start with this. There was a meme that I saw a while ago that said the people who are trying to um, vote against, the people who don't want to see CRT incorporated more into our society, are trying to keep their children and grandchildren just from seeing just how racist they actually are.
Oops.
And I know, wasn't that's a lot. It's going around on social media. I thought that was just phenomenal when I saw that. And I was like, okay, that's it. No story. We don't need to say anything else. But we all have a responsibility. And um, this is not about white guilt.
Mm.
This is not about white fragility. Um, we're not trying to threaten a perceived way of life. by beginning to have these discussions or continuing to have these discussions around CRT and life in America, or even life around the globe. Around the globe, that's not what's happening. But a lot of the narrative is being spun that America has to live up to its ideals. I know, I know, I know. And with that, I too chuckle when I read that because I said, but America wasn't idealized for people of color to be in power or to be equal. Clearly, if you look at the founding documents, you
Mm.
know this is not true. When we talk about all men being created equal, people of color were not even thought of being men. And oftentimes people talk about whether or question whether or not people of color actually created or from the same creator as other individuals who were in power. And that is one of the things we talk about, the importance of narrative and being able to make sure we understand who's responsible for writing the stories.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to support initiatives that are inclusive, that are diverse, that are representative, and that reflect accurate representations and narratives of history. Particularly, and it's just not one version of history. It's not the history that's just been written by the people who win, but by everyone who was there. So we want all the perspectives in that. We have to support the development of opportunities for all individuals. We also have to dismantle these structures that keep individuals out instead of inviting them in. I mean, you can't make a building that's just made of walls. I mean, every once in a while, you're going to need a door, you're going to need a window, maybe even a peephole or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have to realize that we are stronger together. We have to also realize that we are destined to repeat those events that we exclude from our histories, in both the good and the bad. So we cannot continue to blindly just accept the status quo. And to go back to one key word that you said, we have to vote. But we just don't show up to vote. We have to vote intelligently.
Right.
Have to research the people who are voting and realize that if we're just showing up to vote for the presidential election when there's a black president, that's not enough. We have to vote for the governors who are making the appointment for judges. We have to vote on the city council level,
Yes.
who's making appointments for the school board, who's over the schools and school boards. I mean,
Right.
so this all this trickles down, and we have to be engaged and be, to use the current phraseology, woke.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. This is, I have to be honest and say, while we were sitting here talking, my mind, what came to my mind is this is the pandemic. And during the pandemic, I believe everywhere, almost, I guess I would say everywhere every location, every different location on the continent has had to face up to some less than standard treatings of Black people. From Nigeria here, starting here, then Nigeria with, I think it was scars, and now my mind went to Ukraine, with the coverage that I just saw about the Black people being pulled off of trains while they're trying to get out. So,
But somebody thought that that was okay.
right.
And that's part of this bigger narrative that we have, because people say, well, if anybody's going to be sacrificed, we're going to sacrifice the darker skinned people. We're
My
going to
Lord.
sacrifice the people who are not seen as being citizenry or part of this country, where some of the people are. And so we have to be very careful about, again, how we are how we're interpreting how we look and what we look like. 'Cause there's so many things that we can't tell just on the basis of look.
Mm-hmm.
But that still speaks to the power of skin color, the power of nationality, whether it be perceived or real, nationhood, these notions around identity that are so important. And all the stories of tragedies that are happening in Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
period. But to think that people are being singled out on the basis of race and their perceived nationhood,
Mm-hmm.
and done so in such a violent manner.
Yeah.
is unthinkable. But this, I hope, is going to be another one of these moments where we can look and say, yes, race may be a social construct, but the consequences of race are real.
Mm. And so when we talk about the look piece and using fashion as that lens, segueing over, because we will talk about this all day and we will get deep. Oh Lord. Um, what do you think, or, you know, using that lens, how do other cultures use that fashion as a lens to see us?
Well, it's interesting that going back to people of color being global influencers, it's a wonderful position, I believe, for many individuals to be in thinking that there's so many wonderful things that are coming out of quote unquote Black culture.
Hmm.
However, simultaneously, a lot of people can't stand us or have these negative ideas about what it means to be Black in America. You've watched the news.
Hmm.
You know what it means to turn on the news and there be, oh, robbery and murder and drugs and these other things that are associated with urban life, so to speak. But
Hmm.
yet you flip the channel and then you have the entertainers on one end, on the other, on the other channel, who
Hmm.
are modeling behavior and teaching a variety of lessons through their music and entertaining. So I mean, there's this dichotomy that exists,
Hmm.
and everybody can't be a superstar,
No,
but everybody also can't be a criminal.
no.
But we live in an environment where even the superstars who look like us are being criminalized.
Mm.
And so we have to begin to change. We have to begin to change that narrative. We have to begin to create other narratives. And that's really one wonderful thing about Black History Month, because during Black History Month, we hear tons of wonderful information about what's happening in the Black community. But February 28th at 11:59, that's done. Black people are no, are no longer wonderful. So we have to really, we have to reevaluate, and we have to make sure that we're keeping our history front and center 365 days a year.
Mm.
So it can't be. I know there was a fast food company that talked about it was 365, which people laughed about that, but for real, it's like, yeah, we do need to really think about making sure that that same attention to positive narrative that we have during the 28 or 29 days of February are also presented during the remainder of the year.
Mm. That is so powerful. And we as a people have to embrace that and do it.
We do, but we can't do it alone.
Right.
We need our allies. We need people who look like us and people who don't look like us to
Hmm.
join us in this deconstructive period. Because people talk about reconstruction after enslavement.
Hmm.
Well, right now we're in a point of something that could be labeled deconstruction. And then we can have a rebuilding or a rebirth or a renaissance that flourishes out of that. But we have to rethink and reposition ourselves on a local as well, as a national and a global level.
Mm. This is so good. Oh my gosh, this is so good. I'm thanking you so much um for this convo. So I'm looking at the time. I want to be respectable. And anybody who has questions, I know that there is a delay with the transmission. So feel free to put questions in the chat. And then in a few moments, I will share questions with Dr. Stevens. So let's talk about that image maker portion. You've mentioned that we are fashion. That's that's one of the main. I, stumbling all over my words because I'm thinking about all we just talked about. But that is one. When they talk about GDP, fashion could be considered the world's seventh largest economy. I think that's the quote.
Yes.
So why should people? And we want to talk about the fashion programs that you have at Howard, but why should people consider a career in fashion?
Well, being engaged in the fashion industry is a calling, first of all. So if you haven't been called to be in the fashion industry, just don't hop up and take up space. You know, that's my first thing. It's a calling. And the wonderful thing about our industry, Carla, is that there's so many ways to enter.
Mm-hmm.
It's and a lot of people think that fashion is just about what they see on Project Runway, and it's not.
Right.
There's so many different aspects, and just if you just follow the money, if nothing else, the money's not necessarily in designing.
Right.
It's the money's in the other aspects. I mean, you have retail aspects, you have visual merchandising, you have all the people who contribute to the construction and design of clothing that are a part, who are gainfully employed. You have your pattern makers and your graders. You have people who are even doing alterations. You have people who are doing textile weaving as well as textile design. I mean, there's so many, but then you have people who are on the agricultural level as well. And we don't really think about, getting involved in fashion and saying, hey, I want to go raise some cotton. I want to grow some cotton. Or I want to raise some sheep. A lot of people are not thinking about that. But I know I just read a story about some Black farmers who are supplying, I think, cotton for some of the products that are being made at Target.
Oh, wow.
And which was incredible. I'm like, wow, Black farmers who are doing this.
Wow.
And so there are lots of ways to interject yourself into the industry, but you or whomever need to be passionate, not you specifically, Paula, but to people listening, you need to be passionate about being in the industry. And of course, there's education, but then you have related things such as other aspects of business, because of course we're talking about money. You need to be engaged in accounting. We need people in the C-suites as well, who are going to be making decisions about what products are going to be sold and to whom, and how much they're going to be valued for. So I mean, there's so many different ways to engage. So if you're not really passionate about fashion, and this isn't, oh well, I just want to do this one thing, and maybe I could do fashion on the side, then I don't necessarily know that you need to have a career in fashion. Keep your hobby, do what you need to do, and that's that. But if you truly love the different aspects that are around fashion and the auxiliary industries that support it, I'm saying jump all in, because it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time.
I love it. You know what? And I want to thank you for what you said. Because as everybody always says, start with why. And there are a lot of people that I want to be in fashion, but you've already addressed that matter. So I thank you for doing that. Um, yeah, like you said, it is a calling. It
It
is a
is.
calling.
It is.
What would you say? What you've already hit on it, but just a quick recap. If somebody's thinking of just doing it as a side job, because you talked about that a little
Yeah.
bit. So elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
That side job versus this is what I'm supposed,
Right.
knowing that
No.
this is a calling.
Right. Well, it's everybody should have hobbies. Everyone should have something to do. There is we live in a gig economy and a side hustle economy right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying quit your side hustle. I'm not saying that.
Right.
Um, but the industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I think about just the number of people who want to be designers, among people who want to be stylists, the people who want to be these different makers and creators. I think about the people who are responsible for creating the advertisements for particular goods and services that are available. I think about the people also who are working in museums, the people cataloging information, researchers, etc. I mean, there's so many ways to be able to get into the industry. Um, so with that, it becomes, if you are truly called to be in the industry, you need to get as much information as you can to prepare you to be successful. And it's not just about, oh, getting a degree in fashion either. I encourage people to get a degree in fashion, but we have lots of students at Howard as well as other institutions who don't have degrees in fashion who go and work in the fashion industry. But getting as much information about human beings,
Mm.
because these are the people who are wearing the clothes. Or if you're going to be designing for pets, then get the information about the pets. Because there's, oh my gosh, I've seen some wonderful companies that make blankets for horses, and they're not cheap.
Wow.
And I look at stores that have arisen in the last few years that cater to pets.
Yeah.
So, and there's a fashion section, their clothing stores. And I was in Penny's one day and saw they had clothing for the dogs in there in one of the center aisles.
I
So
wasn't
again,
even thinking horses, girl. You be crazy.
I mean, if you need protection, that's one of the functions of clothing. It provides protection. So,
Right.
and it doesn't say you just have to be human. So it's just, you have just this huge range
Right.
um, of different entryways. But get as much information. I encourage everyone to travel as much as possible and to see
Mm.
people in their element wearing clothes and engaging in fashion, and it's in their cultural sense, paying
Mhm.
attention to the mores and norms. But
Mhm.
also you can do that in the United States, because there's some diversity here in the US as well. And so when you go to different places, people look different. They
Right.
dress differently. So just being mindful of that. Internships are critical
Mm.
um, to this process. I believe that having opportunities to learn from people who are established in the business are essential. And
Mhm.
that's one reason why, Carla, your career day is so important for our students, because they get a firsthand opportunity to engage with someone who is doing what they think they want to do. And knowing what you want to do, and then learning that you don't want to do it, is important in the process as well. But it is. But it's so critical for us to get that firsthand information, because it goes back to the idea about the narrative.
Yeah.
Because fashion is painted oftentimes as this very frivolous, very luxurious lifestyle, and people associate that with the job experience as well. Not to mention, they often mistake that for the labor that is involved. And for the fashion industry, you have to do the labor,
Mm.
particularly if you're in on the creative end. But also, even if you're just trying to work your way through a company to a C-suite, you have to do your due diligence. You have to put in the work. You learn as much as you can, and then eventually you'll be able to ascend to hopefully the job of your choosing. But it's so critical that students continue to have this engagement with professionals in the industry time and time again, so that they can take those opportunities and that learning from them, and make critical decisions about themselves and their career, and what they may want to experience and what they might not want to experience. But also keeping in mind that no two people have the same experience.
Mm.
Everybody has a different path. And just because your path doesn't look like someone else's path doesn't mean that your path is not valid. It doesn't mean that you're not going to eventually reach your goal. It just means that you're on a different path, which is
Mm.
great. And my students talk to me all the time about their experiences from being able to attend such programs. And with that, being able to ask questions, because that access is important. And this is what I'm talking about, knocking down doors and walls, because you are creating opportunities for our students to be able to learn from the professionals, the seasoned, and
Mm.
then more importantly, to see people who look like them. Because if they can, we've heard, if you can see it, you can achieve it. So
Right.
that representation is important, particularly when we live in an environment where we may not see ourselves represented on a regular basis, particularly in the C suites or in particular places and spaces. And so being able to create opportunities where people can say, oh, you can come to this particular place. You can flourish here. You can do this. You can have your dreams. You can follow your passion. You can be engaged in the fashion industry. And in, again, a variety of different ways.
Mm. Tell me about the programs that you, and thank you for that. Tell me about the programs that you offer, fashion programs at Howard. And then I want to ask second part to the question. If there's schools that are, because I had conversations recently
Mhm.
with schools that either are no longer, Black schools that either are no longer offering fashion as a program, more so, or they're thinking of not offering it
Mhm.
because they can't get the funding.
Okay.
So, what programs do you offer at Howard, and then what suggestions do you have? Based upon experience, which you've always had to overcome to those schools.
All right. Thank you for that question. The first thing to part one is we offer a 4-year Bachelor of Fine Arts as well as a 2-year Master of Fine Arts in fashion design at Howard University. So I know the application deadlines are coming up soon for, I believe, for the MFA program. I believe they've already passed in February for the BFA program. But if you're interested, keep us in mind, and by all means, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to provide any information that I can about our programs. The second one's a little bit more challenging, but
Mm,
let's go. Let me just dive into it. Fashion is an expensive program. Fashion design, matter of fact, most of the creative arts are expensive programs, period.
yeah,
There's specialized equipment that you need. More importantly, there's space that you need in which you would put the equipment.
yeah.
Um, Many of our class sizes have less than 12 people, usually 10 to 12 people in some of our classes. And so we like to keep them small and intimate so we can really begin to engage with the students and to make sure we have an allotted time. Um, and then COVID, of course, has exacerbated the idea around space and
Mm,
social distance, and teaching design online is one that we're in the process of mastering. We haven't gotten there. We still have some work to do. Some of us do it. Some of my colleagues do it a lot better than I do. But it's a process and it's about learning.
mhm,
But for institutions that are considering getting rid of fashion programs, obviously they're going to have to think about the cost effectiveness of having a program. You need faculty, you need equipment, you need space. And if it is not part of your strategic visioning, it's not, period. But I encourage even my colleagues at Howard to think about the wide range effects of fashion and how many different majors um, with which it can communicate, and being able to think very interdisciplinarily about fashion and all of those points of entry that are so critical to the success of this multi-billion-dollar industry.
mm,
And if you're, I mean, going back to the mention of this being the seventh largest GDP in terms of industry, that is just an astronomical figure. And so when you think about preparing leaders for the next century, and I don't know a single HBCU that's not trying to do that, or even majority institution.
yeah,
Um, that's what education institutions want to do.
right.
But it seems to me that people are not going to stop wearing clothes anytime soon. At least I'm hoping that they won't. Um, it is, and clothes and fashion happens at so many different levels. So you're not saying, oh, I can only meet the needs of this one contingent who happen to be wearing $600 t-shirts from Haute Couture.
Yeah.
You know, Fashion happens in gas stations, on highways across the country. I can remember going into a grocery store and seeing tennis shoes, and it's like, why do they have tennis shoes here? Heaven knows that there's a rack of leggings in there. And with the pandemic, I mean, somebody designed them.
That's
Somebody somebody made an order as a
right.
buyer and said, we need to include leggings next to the ad bill. Someone made this decision. It is, so I mean, we have to be very mindful that, there are all these different levels of fashion that are
Right.
occurring. And so, yeah, so if you want to be on the haute couture level, that's one thing. If you want to be at the gas station, that's another. Most folks are going to find themselves somewhere in between. But I encourage everyone to think about what it means and what the economic value of fashion brings to our economy. That's the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Balance that with the amount of work that's required,
Mm-hmm.
next. The other thing I believe has to do with identifying partners who are going to support your institutions in their programming. Obviously, I mean, between teaching, overseeing the program, and everything else that I'm required to do as a faculty member, I don't have time to put together a 2, 3, 4 day career day.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful to people such as yourself, Carla, who is saying this is how we can support we can partner with you to provide these opportunities to enhance our curriculum, as opposed to me trying to figure out how to turn my 24-hour day into a 46-hour day, which is impossible. Um, and if you're telling me you're doing it, then I need to talk to you offline. We need to have a different conversation. But I mean, these types of opportunities are critical. And also, funding becomes essential. We need to have partners who are providing opportunities for career days, for internships, externships, jobs post graduation, training programs, scholarships, ones that support our programs as well, with equipment, such as Harlem Fashion Row and Icon 360. I mean, there's so many different partners that can exist, and ways to support our programs and our students. Not to mention, this idea around curriculum as well.
Mm.
Find some people who can jumpstart that curriculum
Mm.
to integrate it across an institution, as opposed to just leaving it in its traditional arts or home ec or human ecology type of corner.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned home ec. I remember taking home ec. I don't even know if the schools offer home ec anymore.
No, not under that rubric, because I think in the 80s it shifted to like human ecology, and then I think in the 90s it was family and consumer sciences. So, and a lot of art departments now have fashion. So it's at least the design portion. So it just really depends upon where you are. But if a school, if you can't do it and do it well, then I think we just need to take pause and maybe just to think very differently about how to best again prepare the students. Because one of the saddest things that I hear is when students leave the program and say, oh, they can't find a job. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute, what do we not do?
Oh,
Because we want to make sure people are gainfully employed.
right.
Um, and we all have a responsibility to play. The student has a responsibility, but we as institutions also have that responsibility as well.
Right. I have one question that came through, but I want to ask if you remember last year, what were some of the, was Black Fashion Career Day empowering to the students? Did they feel?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. They were so excited because, again, that opportunity to interact with someone just personally, to be able to ask questions, to be able to see someone who looks like them and suggest that, hey, with a little bit of elbow grease, with a little bit of time, you can be in this place.
Mm,
This is something that you can do. Representation is important, and they were excited about that, seeing that representation across the industry.
thank you. It lets me know the labor was not in vain.
Oh, definitely not, definitely not. We're
The
looking
labor
forward.
right now is not
We're,
in vain.
we're looking forward to the one this year as well.
Yeah, you know what? I have one question that came through, and then
Yes.
I will tell everybody about the person that confirmed today that isn't on the profile yet, but I have to get her. I already said her. I have to get her on the profile. But this question can't make sure I read it correctly. I don't think. Wait, because most of us came from high schools where our teachers. No, okay, so your teachers, when you had, and I want to clarify this question because I think when we were talking, you and I both said that we had instructors that looked like us that we could identify with. Is that
We did.
correct?
We
But
did.
you're teaching at Michigan State University, and you're teaching people that have never had anyone that looked like us.
So, yeah, some. There are some. Not
Okay.
everyone,
Not
but a
everybody.
significant number have
Okay.
never had an African American professor.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just clarifying that question for the person that sent it in. So I want to first of all, I want to thank you for
Thank you.
incredible conversation.
Always a
Um,
pleasure.
Lord knows we could go on and
We
we have
could. We
we
could.
have to talk offline. And then the rest of y'all will be jealous. So but I want to just tell everybody, remind everybody that Career Week is coming up. I think we got what 2 weeks now. It's the fourth week in March. Just to highlight some, we have well, first Monday night we're going to introduce everybody to what our scholarship program will be like. We're going to give away a scholarship for a stylist to attend FIT here in New York. Tuesday night we have a guru. I call him a guru, and I know everybody's mind is going to be blown when they hear from Samuel Alexander Jr. He's a fashion technologist, C2C consumption. Oh Lord, please forgive me. C2C. And then we have like Keith Major. Thursday night we'll have Kalila Wright with Chief Message Officer with Message in the Bottle.
Awesome.
Fashion Fair. We're going to take an exploration through the Ebony Fashion Fair traveling fashion show with some of the cast on Friday evening. We have Keith Major, who is the photo director. I hope I'm saying his title correctly for ebony.com. We have several others. And I may have one more, well, maybe two more coming, but I'll wait until that is confirmed. But today I did get confirmation that lovely lady, Therese Myers, who is the director of data management at Tiffany and Company, is going to be coming. So she will be with us Wednesday night. We're going to have a wonderful Wednesday, Wisdom Wednesday, and she will talk with us about what she's doing as far as the nonprofit space is empowering girls. She'll talk with us about the fashion luxury space as well. So I'm really excited about that. She's just a really dynamic person. So y'all stay tuned. Well, I do have one person confirmed, but I am not gonna tell y'all until it's all confirmed. So I'm gonna hold that to end of the week, maybe. So we'll see. Once it's all final, then I'll come back and tell you all. And again, happy International Women's Day for anyone listening. Thank you all for participating. And food for thought, Dr. Elka, do you have any final words that you want to leave anyone with?
Don't be afraid to explore and learn and identify your passion. And as you are going through your journey, take someone with you.
Well said. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.